Welcome to Property, What's the Future? Hosted by myself, Nigel Berney of NL Property, and my co-star, Mark Shipman of Michael Elliott. Over the next 90 minutes, we will be supported by 9 panellists who are coming to us from the areas of politics, banking, property, and journalism to discuss and debate property, what's the future? Our aim is to provide some insight into the issues and challenges that we're all facing today in the property sector. But hopefully, with Mark, in a lively, perhaps even enjoyably fashion, but of course, with some leading industry experts.
A very hot and warm welcome to you all on the hottest day of the year, which we hope will prove to be the biggest debate and the hottest debate of the year. Our virtual property event is designed to be interactive, informative, thought-provoking, and an opportunity to help Nigel and I support 2 very worthwhile causes, Rays of Sunshine and SEDEC. All of our panelists have kindly given their support and energy and time in helping both of us raise substantial funds for these charities to carry out the necessary and crucial work, more of which you will hear later. We have divided our panelists into 4 separate groups in order to allow us both time to question, probe, gain their insights into the challenges that lie ahead.
But before we start our first panel discussion, and I can see our 2 guests are already waiting to start, I'd just like to alert you to some of the functions that can be provided on the Big Marker platform. So first of all, Mark especially, and I, would like to receive as many questions as the audience can throw at us. So you will see there is a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please use it. Send us questions so we can interrogate, probe, and maybe rile a number of our panelists throughout this morning and this afternoon. There's also a chat box, and the chat box function is for us to send you messages. So please, if you see a red dot, check it out. And at Mark's insistence, we want to keep the audience engaged. And so we're going to do that through a series of polls. So when you see a poll, answer the question, engage with us, and we'll reveal the answers during our debates. And finally, of course, we're both here to support 2 worthwhile charities, SEDEC and Rays of Sunshine. So there will be an opportunity to not only donate, but also pledge throughout the next 90 minutes.
I'm delighted to welcome our first 2 panelists. The Right Honourable Lord Boateng, a barrister, a former MP holding several posts in government, including in the Cabinet as Chief Secretary to Her Majesty's Treasury, and Mr. Ian Marcus, Senior Advisor of Eastdorf Secured, who spent 32 years in the banking industry, and one might describe him as an old banking campaigner. Thank you for both joining us today. Let's start with our first question, Nigel.
Good idea, Mark. So, Paul, if I can address you first. We find ourselves in very challenging times. And what I'd like to know is, can the politics accommodate the new reality? And how do you think that the politics will play out both globally and locally?
I think that's the $64,000, but not actually $64,000, £130 billion question, because that's what it's going to cost. The bailout for households, for businesses, for incomes by the end of this year. That's what the Bank of England tells us it's going to cost. And that gives you an indication of the scale of the problem. All my political life, politics has been dominated by the debate between the parties as to who's best to control the deficit, to manage the deficit, to reduce the deficit, who's best to reduce the national debt. Well, we're now facing a recession domestically and globally. Domestically, a fall of between 13 to 14% of our GDP, according to the Bank of England. Compare that to the banking crisis in 2009, when we saw a fall of 4.2%. So to get us out of a situation in which last month we had a debt to GDP ratio of 100.9%, to get us out of a situation in which we are facing record levels of unemployment, huge shocks on the supply and the demand side of the economy. To get us out of that situation, we're going to have to tolerate, indeed embrace, a greater degree of public intervention in industry, a greater level of support for small and medium-sized and large businesses, a greater level of support for individual incomes than we have ever envisaged. And
Paul,
indeed,
can I just ask you, because politics is always divided,
yeah,
but this seems to be an opportunity for the division to be unified between the parties, because the event that we've been going through, this pandemic, is an unusual experience for not only the UK, but the world to go through at the same time. You know, it's akin to the effects of a war. You know, this is obviously a health war rather than a physical war between countries. Can you see the politics coming together? Can you see both sides coming together to actually create a solution or a pathway that will allow us to move forward economically and keep those jobs that you mentioned still employed?
I think it's both sides of a wider economic debate. It's not simply a question of Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem. It's also a question of the political pressures within the Conservative Party, because the Conservative Party has, over all the years I've known it, been a party in which there has been a constant tension between, in Margaret Thatcher's days, the wets and the hardline Thatcherites, in our day, between those people who see reduction of the deficit as a price well worth paying. There's to those who believe that actually we can't afford to pay that price. We have today a ruling party that came in with the majority it has on the basis that it was going to serve the needs of forgotten communities who suffered during the last cutback following the financial crisis of 2009. So is that Conservative Party going to prevail, or is the Conservative Party of austerity going to prevail? That's the real question, not the divide between Labour and Conservative. It is the divide within the Conservative Party. And so far...
And I have to say, Paul, I'm delighted you're saying that, but there may be slight bias on the basis you sit on the Labour peers in the House of Lords.
No, frankly, no, because so far, my view is that the Chancellor has done a pretty good job with the Bank of England in responding to the scale of the crisis. But let me suggest to you that the big tests are coming now. Let's see how the government responds to the call from local authorities for support for their spending.
Well, we heard that only this morning, didn't we? How all the local authorities are seeking extra income.
And these are Labour authorities and Conservative authorities. We will see and be able to judge the extent to which the Chancellor feels he's got wriggle room. If he does feel he has, that bodes well for the future, because the reality is that we can't get out of the bind that we're in globally unless there's a consensus within parties and across parties that we're going to have an industrial policy, we're going to have to support incomes, we're going to have to support small and medium-sized businesses on a scale that we have never previously imagined.
Never done before. And Paul,
and job creation as well.
Yeah.
At the same time,
absolutely central to that. And it doesn't just happen. It happens because of public investment and support for private investment. Support for people like those who are watching this particular program.
Correct.
Are we going to free up the private rented market so once again it can intervene successfully? Or are we going to burden it with ever increasing levels of taxation?
Paul,
these are very tough.
Let's bring Ian into the debate, because Ian, I think we've lost your video feed, but I think your audio feed's fine. So hopefully you can hear Mark and I and Paul. Ian, you've been over 32 years in the banking industry, and you've lived and worked through several cyclical downturns. How do you see this event being different to previous downturns? And would you agree? Has our government's actions been appropriate?
Ian, do we have you?
So we might have a technical hitch with Ian's feed at the moment. So whilst we await that to be resolved, there is a poll that I've prepared, Paul, which I think will be really interesting, which is, which of these actions should the government prioritise to stimulate the UK economy? So do you think the government should be reducing VAT? Should there be a cut on stamp duty? I know those of us in property would welcome that. Extend the furlough scheme, and the furlough scheme's been incredibly popular and has kept a lot of people employed. Or should they be extending the government loan schemes that have, again, supported lots of small and medium-sized businesses? So if the audience would very kindly choose and submit their responses, and in a moment, Mark and I can reveal the results of our first poll. Which item would you have chosen, Paul, on that list?
Certainly not cutting VAT. It's too broad, too indiscriminate a weapon. We need more focused interventions to support sectors of the economy that are suffering most. And employment is key to that. So I would support an extension of the furlough scheme. I think we're going to have to see greater a degree of loans and more readily accessible loans.
Okay, I've turned my camera
small
off.
and
Maybe
medium-sized
sometimes my
businesses
microphone is
in
on.
particular, and indeed, as the Germans have done, some grants, because loans actually aren't always reaching the places where they ought to reach, and in some instances, I suspect, are being abused.
Okay, well, let me tell you, Paul, because Mark wants to reveal the results of the poll. And the results are in, Mark.
So it's a bit of a split here, actually. So reduced VAT came in at 39%, and cutting of stamp duty, which obviously is a very...
Well, I was hoping that was going to be number one. That was going to be 100% with all our property people watching.
A property, so that came in at 34%, and only 13% extend the furlough scheme. Extend the government loan schemes coming in at 15%. So, reduce VAT and cut stamp duty virtually neck and neck. But
interesting.
Paul, and actually, Ian, if we can bring you in on this question, we discussed reducing VAT, and Paul, you were kind of fairly anti because it covers such a broad range of goods, services, etc., etc. Would you be in favour of reducing VAT on specific items? Could be clothing, it could be areas that are probably more essential to keep retailers in business and help the consumer on affordability. Because in other European countries, we're seeing VAT cut to 5%, if not zero. And I seem to remember in the 0809 financial crash, we reduced VAT for a year, and it did seem to stimulate. I mean,
so let's hear.
It's a blunt instrument. It's very expensive. While we know, and your sector, it seems to me, your sector has a stronger case for intervention in terms of giving it greater fiscal space than many others. Arguably, we should be actually looking again at some of the disincentives there are now in terms of taxation of going into the private rented sector as a landlord. I don't think cutting VAT on purchases of Chanel No. 5 is going to make that much difference. Frankly.
Paul, how did you know Mark's favourite perfume? I mean, he wears that constantly. So can I just ask Ian, because Ian, we've restored your link here now, so I want to get you into this debate because we missed you. Ian, what should we fear most on the economy?
I'm sorry about the...
That's no problem. But thank you.
You were asking the question about why it's different, and I think it is different.
We're going to have to keep answers quite short for
you've got to compare and contrast with different...
Ian, could I ask you
And,
just to turn off
I
your
think it
video
is
feed and
different
just use the audio?
from the 5 or 6 crises.
Yeah, Ian, unfortunately, this is what happens when you go live. We do have a few occasional slip-ups. So when Ian rejoins in a second, maybe without the video feed and just on audio, we can bring Ian back into the debate. So I'm going to actually ask Paul another question, which is, what should we fear most on the economy, Paul? Is it COVID-19? Or is it the fact that we may well be facing a hard Brexit at the end of this year? And Mark's done it again. He's brought up another poll. So the audience, please participate. Mark, you're so good. You know, the moment I said it, there it is, out there.
It's no hands.
Absolutely. So
sorry to cut across you, Paul. So members of the audience, what do we fear most with the economy, the effects of a COVID-19 pandemic or a hard Brexit, which will obviously come in by the end of this year?
Yeah. So Paul.
Sorry, Paul.
My primary concern is COVID and the recession that we are looking at, which is quite frankly unprecedented in our political lifetimes. My own sense about Brexit is that it's going to happen. If the EU does not adopt a more, if the EU doesn't display a greater degree to move
flexibility
somewhat in our direction, a greater degree of flexibility than it's shown so far, then I think we will have a hard Brexit. I don't think the government's got any wriggle room on Brexit.
And I tend to agree with that, Paul. And Mark. So what do the polls say, Mark? Bring in those polls.
It's very interesting, Paul. The polls seem to back to your stance that COVID-19 77%, so a hard Brexit 23%. And I think you're correct in that. I think it's taken people's minds off an effects of hard Brexit, because the pain we're going through now, and we all are in the same boat, is how bad could hard Brexit be versus what we're going through today, and what we could go through tomorrow with a second wave.
Make no bones about it, though, the impact of a hard Brexit on our supply chains will be pretty heavy. Let's make no bones about it. We are not going to find it easy in a WTO world if we don't arrive at an accommodation with the EU. But similarly, the EU won't find it easy either. So if I were them, I'd be looking at a way of cutting a deal. But our focus, rightly, I believe, as a nation now, is on how we cope with COVID. And how
I totally agree. I totally
and
concur.
how it binds us and brings us all
Absolutely.
together. Can we ask? I don't know if Ian, can you hear us?
No, I think Ian's feed's not there. So I think, Paul, I've noticed that we have about 5 minutes left on the clock, and I've got about 3 questions which I'd like to rattle through with you, if that's okay. The first being, the number of workers on UK payrolls has fallen by more than 600,000 between March and May, albeit the true extent won't be felt until the government's furlough scheme ends later on this year. What actions do you think will best help keep people employed? Because there are a lot of people listening to this who are worried about their jobs.
Yeah, I think we need to revisit the furlough scheme, not just extend it, but also make it more flexible. I think we have to support part-time work. I think we have to support the phased return of people to the workplace. And I think also we need to address the fact that we've not had really for many years now a consensus about the need for an industrial policy that is prepared to countenance public spending, the taxpayer saying that it's in our national interest to support certain strategic industries.
Did you hear that, Mark? National interest. It means you've got to put other people first. And as an agent, I know you're going to find that difficult. But
I think you're a bit hard.
No, it happens, Mark, all the time.
I mean, Paul, my question to you, Paul. I mean, so we have the farmers. The crops are ready for harvesting, and we have a severe problem, and have done through the pandemic, of having local workers available to harvest the crops. I mean, how does this appear to you that we've had to allow plane loads of people from other parts of Europe prepared to pick our crops.
But I think, Nigel and Mark, the one thing you will agree on is that there is no way we are ever going to move from reliance on foreign seasonal labor. It just simply is not to live in the real world, to believe that Londoners are once again going to go, as my grandparents did, from the East End of London to pick hops in Kent. It ain't gonna happen. We're going to be relying on people from Bulgaria, from Romania.
And absolutely, and that's the great thing I've always found about the UK is we are open, we are a tolerant society, and people come and work here from all over the place. But the good news in Paul, our audience has been active. And Mark, I believe you've got a couple of questions from the audience for Paul.
Great.
So throw them at Paul. Come on, put him on the spot.
What, from the
audience? Come on, they're there.
This is from Khalid Al-Ghafari. In the medium to long term, do you not believe that all of this will cause a number of years looking forward with huge austerity? We've been living through this since 2008, 2009. So Khalid's comment is, how are we going to service this debt and pay it back? And
look, Khalid, very good question. And we're going to have to treat this debt as if it was debt incurred during a war. Don't forget, Khalid, we didn't finish paying back the Americans for the last World War, the loans they gave us in the last World War, till the 31st of December 2006. What we had to do was to park that loan, as indeed we parked the loans of the First World War. Well, we're going to have to park this level of public spending and public borrowing. We're just going to have to park it. We're going to have to pay it back over time, and we're going to have to invest in capacity building in our own economy. That's the only way. If we adopt the approach that we had post the financial crisis of 2009, we will work ourselves into a recession, the like of which we've never seen before. We will create huge social dislocation, unemployment, the collapse of our infrastructure. We can't afford to do that.
And Paul, you're absolutely right. This is a global pandemic, and it needs to be treated as such, as a one-off event.
Can I ask
a plug, please, to Rays of Sunshine and Zedek? I know the work of Zedek. I've seen the work of Zedek in Ghana, a country in which I was brought up. I've seen young people from Northwest London, which I used to represent in Parliament, from the Jewish community, working with young Ghanaians in Ghana through Zedek. It does a fantastic job. And I do hope those people looking in and listening into this conversation are going to be very generous towards both Zedek and Rays of Sunshine.
Thank you, Paul. One quick last question, if we can. How do you envisage society and the business community embracing moving forward following the campaign Black Lives Matter?
I think what Black Lives Matter has highlighted, for demonstrating the raw data through her racial disparity audit, is that we live in a deeply unequal society, that we all benefit when we make society more inclusive, more equal, when we improve and enhance our businesses' capacity to grow our markets, but also to draw on an inclusive talent pool. That's a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win in our own country in terms of promoting social cohesiveness, and importantly, globally, just as Zedek does, we are addressing the issue of global inequality. So we are all, there's a famous, you may know him. There was a great teacher who lived at the time of Jesus Christ called Hillel. And he said, if I am not for me, who will be for me? If I am only for me, what am I? The importance of self-reliance, interdependence, and I would argue with Hillel to go on to say, if not you, who? It's a responsibility of all of us in
Absolutely,
order
and
to get
I cannot thank you enough for joining us today, Paul.
my
It's been
great point.
fascinating.
You've been very, very kind with your time,
Yeah.
and it was a wonderful chat.
I'm
And,
just upset that Ian wasn't able to actually take part fully in the debate, and I'm sure Mark and I will arrange another time where we can continue. But Paul has mentioned the two charities, which I have to take as a prompt because I think it's the best prompt we've had to ask for donations and pledges. So up on the screen now to our audience is the ability to support both charities. Please feel free to click the button now and to donate and to pledge. All funds are greatly received. And
Nigel,
Mark and I,
what's our target?
Our target today, Mark, is £60,000. That's the monies we want to raise, which will be split equally between the charities to support their great work.
Can I kick this off by saying that my company, Michael Elliott, hopefully my partner, Dominic Rowe, will back me on this. We all put £5,000 in to get the ball rolling. Can I rely on NL Property, Nigel, to match my £5,000?
Talk about being put on the spot, but Mark,
live.
If the agent can do it, the developer will follow.
You find the combination of that wallet of yours?
Well, I can.
The moths fly out.
It will, because my partner Guy Harmon, no doubt, is listening. So on behalf of both Guy Harmon and myself, it'll be a pleasure to support.
That's fabulous. So we're up to £10,000 of the 60.
Exactly, so and we're well on our way. So Paul, again, thank you so much for your time, and both of us are really appreciative. We'll catch up soon. You take care. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye. So as we discovered with the first property What's the Future panel, things don't always go to plan, and unfortunately Ian Marcus wasn't able to really partake as much as we'd hoped. So Ian, hopefully you're still listening. Thank you so much for giving up your time and energy, and there will, I'm sure, Mark will find a way of twisting your arm for another opportunity. Absolutely. But it's time to move on, Mark.
So we have up next Shamini Barman from Barclays Private Bank. We have Catherine O'Shea from Strategic
Solutions from
Coots. I've got
Who have I got to work with? Who have I got to work with?
I've got structured finance on the brain.
I can see Shipman has joined us.
Welcome. And we have on the way
Catherine's here.
Welcome to you, Catherine. And we're waiting for Oliver Shah,
who is business editor of the Sunday Times.
Business editor indeed. So let's kick off. And
well, Oliver, first of all, I want to apologise to Catherine for you not getting her title correct, because she's worked for years.
My brain's gone on overload. I've got structured finance on my brain.
So welcome both Catherine and Shimani. Thank you so much, both of you, to supporting us today, supporting the two charities and giving up your time. And Oliver Shah has just appeared as well. So Oliver, I don't know if you caught the introduction, but your appearance was incredibly timely. We were just speaking about you.
By magic, we have Oliver. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, well, hopefully you've learned a lot from Lord Boateng, who I thought was incredibly interesting. Very little from Mark as normal, and hopefully an awful lot from me.
And unfortunately, much from me.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions that I've comprised. So if I could start, if that's all right, with a question for Shimani. I understand there has been an uptick of demand coming through to Barclays Private Bank, where you work, for residency in the UK. I'm not surprised with the turmoil that's going on in the world. Why is that, do you think? And what effect do you think that will have on the high-end residential market where a lot of your clients look to invest? Unfortunately, Shimani, we've lost your audio feed. So whilst you're just trying to
Hi,
work that,
is that better?
that's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
I think you did that on purpose just to keep Mark awake, because he's getting to an age now.
I like a bit
he's getting to an age where he can't.
An adrenaline rush that puts me on point.
Yeah, sure. No, but anyways, I've got your question. I heard that. So I think the UK, despite Brexit, remains really attractive for global high net worth families. The UK itself offers a stable economy, stable political system, an enviable legal framework. All of these pillars are very important for defensive wealth preservation, as well as diversification. And I guess wealthy families cannot all have their assets in one place. Ultimately, yes, it's quite important for the high-end part of the market, as wealthy families do not view real estate investing for their own use like private equity, where there are multiples, exit dates, IRRs. Stamp does remain.
Sorry, when you use
entry.
language like that, you've lost Mark. You know, I know he's in property, but IRRs just go straight over the top of his head.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure.
Yeah, so it's the rate of returns, to simplify it. And talking like a property person, I guess, well, stamp remains a friction, I guess, to entry. But I guess when clients are holding for their own use and for the long term, it is acceptable. And just to add, obviously, the UK has a very attractive education system. The remittance basis of taxation are additional attractions to the wealthy to be based here.
All positives and wonderful to hear. Can I ask, or you ask, Mark? Can you ask?
I'm going to ask a question.
You ask a question then. You interfere. You ask a question.
Do you mind if I get?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
Catherine, can I ask a question at your team at Coutts? Is it business? Is it business as usual in lending? Are Coutts priced competitively?
Well, I might be asking for loans shortly, so the pricing bit, I definitely want to ask. I want to hear about the pricing competitively. Absolutely.
Yeah, we can definitely help on both of those. So yes, very much open for business, and I think we are very competitively priced. In terms of being open for business, yes, obviously things had to change during the lockdown, and we had temporary measures in places where you couldn't physically inspect the properties. Obviously that's changed now, and valuation surveyors are allowed to inspect properties, so everything is business as usual. Our product suite hasn't changed. I know some of, particularly the retail banks, have removed some of their higher LTVs. We've kept them in place. And in terms of rates, without going into too much detail, we have products that begin with a 1, and we have 10-year fixed products that begin with a 2.
Fantastic. I mean, that's encouraging to hear, isn't it, Oliver? I mean, from you there representing journalists and obviously being able to enlighten the world to your views, to hear that the banking industry is there working hard even in lockdown, it's great news.
There's still liquidity there.
Yeah, but I was going to ask Oliver, is there any other positive news, do you think, on the horizon that will bring more confidence back to the markets? Because at the end of the day, property is all about confidence.
It's tricky at the moment, isn't it? We've been very surprised watching the public markets, how strong equities have been in the past 2-3 months. And you look at the US, where the FANGs, the big tech stocks, have really dragged up the whole S&P index. You look at the FTSE, which has recovered quite strongly, surprisingly so, given the slew of bad news on unemployment and GDP and these kind of things. And it is quite surprising. I think the markets are buying into the idea that central banks are basically going to stand behind economies in the West, come what may. And that's the one shred of hope the PLCs the PLC investors have held onto, is the idea that central banks, governments won't allow this to turn into a Great Depression. The big question,
which takes the fear away.
Absolutely, and we heard earlier from Lord Boateng about the fact that the world's in it together. This is an unusual, a one-off event. Effectively, it's not a political issue to be booted across the division chambers.
And it's quantitative easing on a worldwide basis. So there doesn't seem to be one country that seems different to the next in the way that they're dealing with the money supply.
So what I think is interesting, and obviously we can ask each of you in turn, but just finish off with Oliver, what positives do you think will come out of the pandemic that will have a lifting effect on property?
I think you're going to see more efficiency from companies in general, and that's short-term going to be bad, I think, for office properties. It's going to be very, very bad for retail property, as we've already seen a slew of CVAs and people not paying rent and that kind of stuff. I think longer term, it should be good for logistics, because you're going to see the world moving at a faster and faster pace in the direction it has been moving in, towards more online, more remote working, more flexibility, that kind of thing. And I think people who can position themselves in the cleverer subsectors of property, which can benefit from that kind of accelerating structural shift, should do well.
What's interesting is I'm going to ask both Catherine and Shamani. You're obviously both working from home, unless the offices have changed the decor recently. Have you been as effective working from home? Have you found that you can be effective with remote working? Is that going to be the new norm for the banking industry?
Do you want me to go first?
Yes, Catherine, you go ahead. The floor is yours.
So I think it's definitely, obviously it's been very, very different. I think the positives that we can look at it and we can take from it is the fact that there's much less friction in dealing with customers now. So technology obviously has played a massive part in that. You have Zoom calls. You don't have to set up a meeting, get clients into the building. It's much easier to say, oh, are you free to speak, and set up a Zoom call that day. And then you have things like electronic signature signing, which makes things a lot more easier than before, where you'd physically have to get signing. So I think there's a lot less friction in terms of our client communications.
But are you missing the office? Are you missing the social interaction with your colleagues?
Yeah, and I do. Yeah, we miss obviously seeing clients physically as well. But yeah, I guess this is the new norm for now. And technology has helped.
Well, I have to tell you, this is the first time I've seen Mark in a jacket in 3 months, and normally he's just attired in a t-shirt. So
I just wanted to.
I don't know who he's trying to impress, because it's not working. It's not working.
To upstage him. So
It's not necessary. So it's all about the content, not about the clothing.
So former barrister, let me put a question out there for our next poll question. So if you like, it's fingers on the buzzers. Has COVID-19 altered your investment into property choices, or yes or no?
Yeah.
How has it affected your decision about buying into property? Are you leaving your money in the bank? Is it in cash? Are you leaving your money in equities? Or are you going to property? So property, how's it altered?
Well, I'm going to start by asking Mark that question. You're in the property business. Has it altered your perception of the market?
Yeah, I would say yes, to a degree. So we act for a lot of ultra high net worths, and they are concerned about the returns of leaving the money in the bank, and therefore they. You
shouldn't say that with two bankers on screen.
No, but with support from the bankers, i.e., borrowing, they like to invest in longer term quality income, so they can get a positive return. Because as we head towards lower interest, if not even negative, there are no returns. So unfortunately, the market is in very short supply, particularly the market I specialize in, London, of sort of 5, 6, 7 year plus quality income.
Well, the bad news, Mark, I've got to tell you, is according to the poll, and the polls say everything, and thank you, audience, for partaking, is that 74% of our audience say
78.
78.
Do you want to borrow these?
Yeah, I have to swap glasses. Hang on a minute.
78%.
I've got the wrong reading ones on. Sorry about that, gentlemen and ladies. 78% says yes. So there you go. So COVID-19 is affecting people's investment.
My clients are obviously in the 22%.
Well, either that or they're doing business with other agents, one or the other. So can I ask Oliver, coming back to you, do you think, only because they're going to say yes, both Shimani and Catherine, to this question, do you think that banks have a big role in supporting the property industry?
Yeah, I think they do. It's always been an industry that needs leverage to work properly, hasn't it? Whether they should is another question. I think.
So as a developer, the answer is yes to both. Just so you know, Oliver. Just so you know.
As a journalist, I'm allowed to be cold-blooded about it. I think banks have a lot of exposure that's going to be quite nasty to work out over the next few years. I mean, anyone who's lent into Hammerson, the retail sort of institutional fund, even stuff like some of the secondary offices and those kind of things, it's not going to be fun working that out. So I can understand it if banks would like to rein in from that kind of stuff. But there's always money to be made, isn't there? And there's always pockets of the market.
There's always opportunities. So we can ask Shimani that. How are Barclays lending at the moment?
So, actually going into the lockdown, we anticipate the major slowdown. I obviously represent the private banks, so we see a lot of activity in the residential space. And we've been really surprised with the requirements for completions as well as new requests. And amongst our wealthy client base, we've also seen an increase in demand for country estates as well. So all in all, to support the high-end segment of the market, there's been a lot of demand. And obviously, representing the private bank, we're very bespoke and tailored in our approach. So we look at the overall net worth and wider client relationship to ensure our LTVs are reflective of the market rates.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
I'll let you ask a question. Just this one.
I'll put my hand
Just
up
only one. You can only ask one.
This is
but there's some audience participation going on here.
I just want to ask one question for Oliver Shah. Oliver, one question. Oliver, apart from me, who has impressed you in the real estate sector most over the years? And I take myself out of the equation, so feel free.
Nigel, Berney, NL Property.
He's never heard of you, but go on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mark is so far ahead, he's in a league of his own. But
he is in a league of his own, that's for sure.
That's what we like to hear.
Leaving him aside, I suppose I see it through a journalistic lens, so we tend to like the more colourful, talkative, flamboyant characters. So I've always loved the entrepreneurs, the Ronsons, the Ripblats,
The Rubens.
Tony Pidgley's, the Rubens, indeed.
Yeah.
Those kind of guys. I think on the more
Quite
sort of
iconic.
yeah, they're fun and they're sort of they're creative, aren't they? They build things, they take risks. All industries need that. I've also been very impressed over the years with people like Blackstone and Crosstree, those smarter, more opportunistic institutions.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of flamboyancy in the property world, and Mark is obviously leading the flourish with his jacket today on that front.
You're jealous.
Of course, jealousy is
It's
the
a
number one
nasty
thing.
trait.
Nasty trait. Okay, well, talking about traits, we have a number of questions that have come in from the audience, and thank you for sending in the Q&As. Really appreciated. So, Mark, for once, I'll let you read a question out.
Okay, this is from Andrew Breacher, senior partner of Lawyers Breachers. He asks, given that the working from home opens Pandora's box, will the office market in London go into freefall? Who do you want to put that to, Nigel?
Well,
I
think it's an interesting question, because most people are worried that their head office costs are substantial. They've been told to work from home by the government, only travel to work if it's necessary for the last few months. I know of lots of firms who've already told their employees that they shouldn't return until January to their offices. Everybody's kitted up to work from home. And you can see that at the moment. Both Catherine and Shimani are working remotely for both their banks. My team is working remotely. I know your team has gone back to the office, but before you were operating quite well remotely. I think it's going to be a very interesting time ahead. But I think the one message I've heard constantly from people is they miss company. I mean, I know I'm sitting relatively close to you, but far enough away. But I have missed you over the last few months. It's all been virtual, and it's actually been quite a unique experience to sit in a room again and have a conversation. So I think there is an attraction, I think, on lots of levels. I think cultures of companies are much easily developed within an office environment. I think learning within companies is developed within an office environment, and creativity, which is key in offices. You get that by sparking off over conversations, whether it's over a cup of water at the water fountain or coffee, although how that's going to play out in the COVID world, who knows? But I think there is a need for an office, whether it's the same extent in terms of accommodation, that may change. But I think most companies will still retain an office presence. But let's open to Catherine. Catherine, what do you think Coutts will be doing in the future?
Well, we've been on the Strand, not in the exact same building, but for over 300 years. So I don't think we're going to be giving up our head office. I personally work more on the residential side, so I don't have a strong view in terms of what I think is going to happen to office prices. But I guess there is that challenge of, do we need as much space going forward? I think flipping that on its head, and again, it's not because I don't work in office space, but I think one thing to think about is, we know there's a shortage of residential housing stock, and will there be changes to planning laws to allow property to be converted more easily to residential property?
Well, again, if I could put my hand up and say I've got a vested interest in that, I think there is going to be changes, and I think the planning system is something that needs to be addressed. I think there needs to be an ability for buildings to be repurposed in many different forms.
My opinion is that before COVID-19 struck, we were hearing from a lot of occupiers that the staff didn't like to sit so close to each other. And so front of house would be very spacious, boardroom facilities, reception areas, and back of house, people did not have enough space. So the big corporates were working out how they could create more social distancing, which is very much what's obviously up for discussion now.
Can we ask Oliver, Ollie, what's going to happen with the newspaper industry? Because there's obviously a huge amount of office content for you and your colleagues.
Well, they can do an awful lot.
Yeah,
so,
I can only speak from our position, really, but definitely right now, density use is way down. I would say there's probably 1 in 10 people who are usually in the newsroom who are in. The rest is remote. I'd say about half of those who aren't in would like to come in and sort of haven't got the desks there to sit in. The other half would rather stay at home. I think over time, the sort of numbers being bandied around are we'll probably use 20% less floor space, and we'll either try and sublet some or give some up when the time comes. And I would imagine that's a pretty standard conversation being had across different.
I mean, it'd be interesting. We've got some obviously other panelists joining us later, and some of whom own large swathes of office buildings. So it'd be interesting what their take is. Now, we have some other questions that have come into us from the audience. And one of them is interesting, was from Julian Sape, which says, how will buildings be repurposed? So I think the answer to that is very simple. It'll be whatever is applicable in terms of a commercial use that is sustainable in the future. So there will be a lot of buildings you saw when we had permitted development rights granted that allowed offices that had been redundant or empty for a long time to be changed into residential. That was very successful. I know
Westminster have a big policy. They're trying to really push, increase the size of the residential stock. So correct. I can see Westminster on micro office locations allowing a change of use to residential. And actually, planning process within Westminster and other councils is speeding up remotely. So I think there'll be more stock in Westminster going away from office to residential.
Ollie, can I ask you another question? I think the big losers that have come out from COVID-19 are in the hospitality, well, there's many, but especially in property, in the hospitality, leisure and travel sectors. What assistance do you think should be provided specifically for these sectors?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think with each one it's slightly different. With travel, the government really does need to get on with these air bridges and trying to reopen as much international travel as they can, as reasonably quickly as they can. With hospitality, it's tough, isn't it? Because you just need less social distancing, and a lot of places aren't viable, even with 1 meter social distancing, cafes and restaurants. So I suppose you have to balance what's safe with what's doable, but I guess as soon as that can be relaxed, it should be. Things like banning landlords from using stat demands and winding up petitions, I think, has been a bit wrong-headed and a bit of muddled thinking, because it just kind of pushes problems down the road, doesn't it? And I don't think that really helps anyone in terms of adult debate around tenants and landlords and resolving rent situations. But I think with each industry it's slightly different, and in each one it's constrained by what's safe. It's quite difficult.
It is. And I'm sure both Catherine and Shimani, both with your banks, you have a number of clients in all of those sectors, and I'm sure you're supporting all of those throughout the current times. But it'd be interesting to see what actions the government carry out to carry on supporting those industries as well as many others. I can't believe, but our 20 minutes is nearly finished.
Well, it is. We're over.
We're over.
We're
up. We're over.
All that's left for us, guys, is to thank you so much for giving your time. No doubt we'll speak very soon, but it's been very enlightening. It's been very informative, and thanks for supporting the charities.
Yeah, I mean, so on behalf of Mark and I, both to Shimani, to Catherine, and to Oliver, thank you again for giving up your time, and thank you being so supportive of both Rays of Sunshine and SEDEC in aiming us to raise funds. So what's interesting is we actually, just so you know, have already got to a total of £15,000 towards our target of £60,000 today. So
quarter of the way there, if my math serves me
well. Luckily, he's an agent and he's always adding up his fees. So the donate button has come up on the screen, which is fantastic. It's a great time, and I know that our current panelists would love people to donate if they can. So if you're able, please, if you haven't donated or pledged before, we would welcome you to hit the button and donate. And again, thank you all so much. Really appreciated Shimani, really appreciated Catherine, and really appreciated Oliver. So now we move on to the interlude where I'm going to inform you about the two charities. I'll talk a bit about SEDEC, and then Mark will follow up with a small few words about Rays of Sunshine, and we'll play you two videos to give you a better indication of the work they carry out. But the film you're about to see about SEDEC shows just a small element of the work that they undertake as a charity. SEDEC is currently working in both India and Ghana, and in partnership with local NGOs to deliver projects on the ground that enable people to lift themselves out of poverty. And we're talking out of extreme poverty. The focus of SEDEC is in areas of education, women and youth empowerment, as well as improving people's livelihoods. But that's just a few. Locally, SEDEC works in the UK community to increase their sense within the youth of the UK community to increase their sense of global responsibility, to inspire youth leaders and to commit them to a life pursuing social change.
SEDEC is the UK Jewish community's response to extreme poverty. Our vision is to reduce extreme poverty in some of the poorest regions of the world. In northern Ghana, we've embarked on an ambitious new partnership with the Empowerment for Life programme, E4L, working directly with local community groups with a focus on education, youth, and livelihoods. In the Mbane Lily community, the women's group were trained by E4L in how to produce and market shea butter. They used their training to engage and secure a long-term contract with world-famous skincare brand The Body Shop.
The bola nursing teacher had to work by MPB president Kota Yina Bana Yildash.
After his training from E4L, this teacher was able to secure government funding to create a self-sustaining school for his community.
E4L pushed me to request for this land and establish this school.
The E4L program educates community groups on how to function effectively and access government funding. They are then able to prevent corruption and the misuse of funds to lift whole communities out of poverty. With this sustainable model, SEDEC can ensure we get the maximum value out of every pound donated, creating meaningful change for decades to come.
Rays of sunshine exist to brighten the lives of seriously sick children in ages of 3 to 18. We tend to brighten their lives by granting magical wishes, providing ongoing support within hospitals, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have provided or continue to provide gifts of joy and boxes to both hospitals and houses. We also provide much needed counselling, and we touch the lives of up to 20,000 children annually through hospitals, ward wishes, concerts, and the granting of the magical wishes. So please give generously.
I want to be 2 things when I grow up. I want to learn how to train guide dogs, and then for my days off job, I want to be a vet. I love dogs.
We're here at Guide Dogs in Maidstone and we are granting Stella's wish.
We came in and then we met some of the doggies, and then we kind all the doggies and did some tricks, and we played a game with the dogs.
She has a condition called neofibromatosis, which is tumours that grow on the nerves of the body, inside as well as out. She's already had 1 operation to remove quite a large one from her eye. She's having constant hospital appointments, MRI scans, just to sort of overlook the ones that we can't actually see.
My favourite part of today was seeing the puppies, because they're cute and they're fluffy and they love me and they can always lick me.
I don't think I can actually put into words, I really can't, what this means. To help her
make her wish come true. Thank you.
Thank you, Rays of Sunshine.
Today we are here at Millie Days and we've invited 23 of our Wish families to come along for a day of fun in the sun.
We got time to spend together as a family and enjoy ourselves.
These days are so important to the families. Obviously the child is living with that illness, but the families are affected as well.
It just took us away from our everyday lives, so families sort of health struggles.
Thank you for everything. Yeah, it's been amazing. I loved it.
She's written her own book, Rays of Sunshine, happily printed it for us. So we're really, really proud of her that she's done all this work herself. You know, she's designed the characters, thought about the storyline. It's really fantastic that she's managed to do this.
Thank you, Rays of Sunshine, for granting Scarlett's wish.
A big highlight for us is the amount of activity days we're bringing to hospitals. We're bringing more activity days to hospitals than ever before.
They just create the most memorable experiences. There's been Bollywood dancing, painting piggy banks, stuffing bears, learning magic.
I think it's a small window in their day to step outside of whatever they're experiencing and have fun.
I've been drawing, making pictures. Wow!
Today you see all these children's faces, they're smiling, they're happy, they're all in a happy place, which is incredible to see.
We've done some amazing wishes. We did a wish for a little boy that wanted to fly in a helicopter with Batman. We got the Batmobile to go and meet him at his hospital, drove in the Batmobile to the helipad, and he had a whole superhero afternoon flying up in a helicopter with all his family. We do a whole range of wishes and they are always as unique as the child themselves. We're there to bring a little bit of sunshine and brighten up their lives when they really need it the most.
Wow, two great videos, Mark. Two incredibly well-deserving charities.
Very emotional.
And I'm just hoping that our audience today are going to feel the same way that you and I do, and that they will give generously to both of those charities. So, again, can I appeal to everybody out there? This is the time to donate, to pledge. We're already approaching £18,000.
Fantastic.
So
we're nearly a third of the way there.
Yeah, and we're just getting to the halfway point of today's property. What's the future? So thank you so much for all your support. Thank you so much for continuing to support. Please donate, and let's raise as much money as we can today for these two worthy and deserving charities. So we're moving on now, Mark, to panel session 3. Are you ready? Have I riled you yet? Are you ready for action?
I'm still half asleep.
Well, it's time you got up. It's time you dusted yourself down.
I'm getting there. I mean, this next one's a very interesting one, isn't it?
So, well, I think we're joined by two of the bastions of the residential market.
I describe them as legends.
Legends they are indeed.
Legends of the residential market. So we are incredibly fortunate to have Nick Candy, who will be joining us, of originally the Candy and Candy fame, who I would say has changed high-end residential,
luxury residential, not only in London but across the world.
Across the world,
a complete lifestyle choice.
Incredible.
A man who will tell us, hopefully, how from I believe a start of £6,000 in 1995.
Shows how £6,000 how far.
Well, if you invest it properly and you have the get up and go. So we can't wait to be talking with Nick Candy, who's now with Candy Capital, but also alongside Nick is going to be Stephen Conway. Now, Stephen Conway has built up the most phenomenal business at Galliard Homes, and I'm really keen to sort of speak to Stephen about all the things that he's managed to achieve in his career. And
well, understanding about longevity of a career.
Absolutely. And talk about longevity, Mark. It's, you've been in the business for some time, haven't you?
Yeah,
I mean,
a couple of I've still got a few hairs left on my head. But
I'm pleased to say that I'm still on the youthful side.
By 3 years, but go on.
Well, at this age, it all matters. It all matters. But we are awaiting both Nick Candy and Stephen Conway. They will join us hopefully very shortly. Yeah, I think if Nick Candy and Stephen Conway are there, this is the opportune time for both of you to hit your video feed, to click it onto live, as well as your audio feed onto live. Now, if I was talking to Mark about this, he'd have great difficulty. But I know Nick and Stephen, the two of them, are much more capable than my erstwhile colleague, Mr. Shipman, who occasionally interrupts me, which is really annoying.
Can I have a word?
Of course you can.
Can I ask our audience to get their questions ready? Because I would imagine you'd have quite a few questions about how...
Well, I've got my questions ready. I'm already ready to go. I'm raring to go. I'm raring to go.
You're a co-host. We have Nick Candy. Nick, good afternoon to
Nick
you.
joins us live.
You hear me?
Nice and bright where you are.
We can see you and we can hear you loud and clear. So any moment now, we should also be joined by Stephen Conway, who is the executive chairman at Galliard Homes. But whilst Stephen is getting the IT sorted with the video and audio feed, Nick, we've prepared a couple of questions for you. Now, I have to say some of them have come from Mark, my erstwhile colleague. So Mark, can I ask you to go live with Nick with his first interrogation?
Yeah, Nick, good afternoon. How have you been so successful in attracting the world's richest people to come to London, paying world record prices, and how can we keep London top of the pile?
So first of all, I was born in London. I'm a Londoner. And apart from about 6 years I spent in Monaco, I've always lived in London. And I think London's the #1 city in the world by a long way. I think it's, there's 3 major global cities for finance. That's London, New York, and Hong Kong. If you look at Hong Kong today, they've got their own problems and issues going on with China. New York, after the pandemic, I think will be a very different city because going up and down in lifts in a high-rise city is going to change enormously. I just go into a normal lift in a low-rise building here in London, and I went to the bank this morning, 1 person in a lift at a time to get into Barclays Bank. Wow. So, when you've got thousands and thousands of people in high-rise residential and commercial blocks, that's going to change for some period of time. And so I believe, and always have believed, London's the #1 city. And I think there's the demand internationally to come here. It's been here for years. The Middle Eastern market was buying here in the 1970s and 80s. In the 1990s, the Russian markets came here, and I was the first person to have Boris Berezovsky as a customer, and then a whole load of Russians and Ukrainians and Kazakhs came here. And today we've got the Indian and Chinese market settling here as well. As long as we can control certain things in this city, there'll always be huge demand. The biggest risk to this city, in my opinion, is not the pandemic. The pandemic's a global thing. Okay, the biggest risk to this city is crime. And we have to resolve crime. And we have to do that for our children, for our families. And if we resolve crime, London will continue to be the #1 city in the world to invest.
So Nick, moving on, and I totally agree with you. Number one should be where London is on the hotspot for fantastic reasons. The culture, the entertainment industries, when they're up and running again, the restaurants when they're up and running again. It has so many attractions. What I'd like to know is, you're a bit of a deal magnet, and you've done a lot of deals, you're doing a lot of deals, and you hear about a lot of deals. Are deals being done now? What is the state of the high-end residential market at the moment?
Can you hear me? Just because I want to make sure the microphone's still working.
Yes, we can.
Absolutely crystal clear. You're crystal clear.
So actually in lockdown, there's been a whole range of deals done in the high-end market that most people don't know about. There's been a house in Regent's Park that sold for over 100 million. There's been a house in Avenue Road that's under offer for just under 60 million. There's been a number of flats in One Grosvenor Square that sold for about 150 million. And there's a whole range of deals from Notting Hill to Pembroke Square from 25 million all the way up to 150 million. All have happened in the middle of lockdown. And the reason why is London is the city of choice for international wealth and will continue to be so.
And that's fantastic to hear. It's fantastic to hear that there are transactions going on at the top end, that we're still that attractive. I see that Stephen Conway has hopefully resolved his IT issues.
Got rid of those gremlins.
Absolutely. And Stephen, hopefully you can hear Mark and I crystal clear. Hopefully you can see us, and hopefully you can hear Nick Candy as well.
And you can see Nick?
I think it's a question of the unmute button.
Yes.
We're there. Stephen's live.
Welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, so we're delighted that Stephen has managed to join us. Now, Stephen, we were just talking to Nick about how successful he's been at attracting the world's richest people into London and how he's managed to keep London towards the top of the pile as competing cities. Now, you've created a very substantial residential brand over the last 25 years. Where do you... Like only he can, absolutely, like only he can. But where do you see increased demand coming for residential? You know, where are going to be the emerging markets within the UK? Where are the locations that both Mark and I should be seriously looking at and investing in? Where do you think there's going to be the most potential for growth?
Anywhere that's close to a transport links, because the growth is coming from the PRS funds and the international funds that want to invest in London residential, mainly because it's probably now the safest asset class of anything. We're seeing what's happening, shopping being decimated, leisure being decimated. People still have to live in a house, and with interest rates close to zero, that's why the asset class is top of the tree.
Absolutely. And Stephen, can I ask you, over the next 2 years, how many residential units will Galliard Homes be delivering?
Probably 3,000, I guess.
Fantastic. That's a large number. But Nick, you're probably not into the deliverance of 3,000 numbers of luxury units.
In my skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not your sector. Where do you think Candy Capital is going to be investing? Where are you going to be investing? Where's your vision for the future of the next few years?
Well, Candy Ventures is the investment arm of the business, and that they've invested a lot in technology. They've invested in biotech. They have a gold mine in the Philippines, and they invest in real estate as well. I believe that London will benefit enormously over the next 24 months, and it will actually lead the way for this country to come out of this pandemic. The economy has to recover in London first, and the ripple effect will be felt across the whole of the UK. So, and I believe that the asset class of residential will do very well, because you've seen commercial shopping centres, as Stephen said, they've been decimated, and they will continue to be decimated. And so, but we will have to look at different ways of building residential as well. Outside space, technology, contactless technology, air conditioning systems. All of this will need to be re-looked at in the light of the pandemic and how we deliver it. But I think, for a lot of families this pandemic, I'm very lucky. I've got 2 acres of land in the middle of London. But for most families in this pandemic, a lot of them haven't had outside space. So, that would been very, very bad in terms of depression, in terms of loneliness, all sorts of things. And so when we start building again, we will have to think about how we deliver not just the internals of the building, but the externals.
That makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Mark wanted to run a poll, which might catch him out because I want to run it earlier than he suggested. But Mark spoke to me earlier and thought it'd be a good question to pose to the two of you and to our audience. What government action do you think should be prioritised to resolve the housing crisis? Now, we always hear, before obviously we heard every day about the pandemic, the housing crisis was always up there in the headlines. So the poll we'd like to run is as follows. What government action would you prioritise to resolve the housing crisis? Is it changing the planning system, extending permitted development rights, extend help to buy, or is it a stamp duty holiday? So please enter, and then Mark can give you an update in a short while as to where we are with the polls. But what is more exciting, I'm just going to butt in for one more second, and that is to tell everybody that we've broken through the £20,000 barrier.
So we're over a third.
Well, over a third, which is fantastic. Now, that's what happens when Mark's out there asking for funds from the audience. So audience, please keep donating. I'm sure both Nick and Stephen will support us in asking for as many funds that you can either pledge or donate today to these two worthwhile charities. And I know that, Nick, you've had involvement, especially previously with Rays of Sunshine and Mark. So thank you so much for your support today.
It's such an important charity, guys. If everyone watching and listening, if any of our children were born with a disability or needed help, whatever, Rays of Sunshine do so much to grant them that last wish. And, you know, my foundation, my wife, Candy Foundation, does a huge amount with disabilities and children with disabilities across the world. But Rays of Sunshine truly is an incredible charity. And Mark and Nigel, thank you for your help and support.
It's a pleasure. And for those in the audience, we will put the donate button and the pledge button up on the screen. So please, if you haven't already, please take an opportunity to donate. So what's interesting with the poll that we just asked, Stephen, the main winner was changing the planning system, interesting enough, followed by, that was over 50%, and stamp duty holiday was 25%. Stephen, you've been in the game long enough. How would you aid the government? What government response would you want to see to resolve the housing crisis?
Well, it goes back to the very roots of democracy. As long as we allow these planning committees from all areas of all sorts of political dominations to govern what is and isn't right for a planning permission, we will have trouble. So the national interest in getting houses built is not top of the tree. What's top of the tree is getting local councillors re-elected, making sure they keep the jobs, and they'll do anything to keep their walled voters happy. This is absolute nonsense. It's been going on for 100 years and it's got to be stopped.
Interesting. Nick, what do you think? Do you agree with Stephen? Is it all about
100%? 100%. I've been there too many times in planning permissions, and it's the ward councillors, you know, want to get re-elected, and so they don't care about the architecture or the design or anything about the building. They just care about re-election, and we have to find a way around it. Yeah. And actually, with Boris as Prime Minister, and because he was Mayor of London before, he truly understands the problem. So I think we might see some change going forward.
Can I give you a question, Nick? This is from Mark Gersson. Thanks for the question, Mark. Mark wants to ask you, Nick, how did you get the confidence? How did you have the vision to put a pricing at One Knightsbridge at £6,000 a foot? And I think you've achieved more. When the market was way less than half that figure at the time in prime London. And this is, I think, a two-part question. How did you persuade the overseas investors that whilst a young man with a track record, but not a huge track record, for building a block previously anywhere near that scale? So Mark wants to know, how did you achieve the magical figures, and how did you pull a scheme together of such scale? So I remember hearing at the time, I think you borrowed over £1 billion from Euro Hypo to build it. It was their largest unsecured loan in Europe. I mean, what an achievement.
It was a secured loan, but yes.
So
let me answer your first question. Your first question about pricing. So what we did is, and I'll refer to it as the layering effect. We took the prices of what was, achieved locally. So at One Hyde Park, there was a building called 199, the Knightsbridge behind it, and say that it should achieve £3,000 a square foot. I'm just taking, these numbers might not be correct. I'm just taking it as an example. Yeah. And then we said, we're fully linked with a hotel. So we're actually linked with the service of the Mandarin rental. So that must be worth an extra 10%. Okay, we've got a world trophy architect called Lord Rogers. That must be worth an extra 5%. We've got the best services inside a building ever put together for a residential building in London. That must be worth another 10%. We've got James Turrell as our external lighting artist, one of the most famous lighting artists in the world. That must be worth another 5%. So we took the original base of the local market, and then we said, because we're the front row of the grid next to the park where no one can build in front of you, that must be worth an extra 5-10%. So we layered these prices on. So because when we had to persuade people to part with the cash to actually buy these apartments, we had to justify the reasons why they were that expensive. And I remember we did about £750 million off plan before we'd even dug the hole in the ground.
Fantastic. What an achievement. And Stephen, obviously people have seen for many years the success of Galliard as a residential developer, and all the queues that form, your very famous marketing on the radio, where the chairman says, there's a deal to be done, please queue up. Now, what has been the secret of Galliard's success? How have you managed to create so many homes for so many people?
I think we've been lucky. I think we've been in the right locations at the right time. And we've always believed in leaving a little left for the buyer, so that we probably have more repeat buyers than any other house builder in London. Most of them are happy. Most of them keep coming back to go again and roll the dice. And it's been good for them and it's been good for us. In terms of getting it all done, we've always believed in pre-sales to enable the funding to come in, to enable us to keep expanding. But
interesting. I mean, and your marketing is synonymous. I mean, you had people queuing round blocks way before any other developers had used those tactics. So well done. I'm pleased to say that after the recent appeal by Mark and I for the donate button, we're approaching 25,000 mark.
So we're heading towards the
halfway point.
Halfway point.
But we're not there yet. We're not halfway yet. So we still need people who haven't yet either pledged or donated. Please use this opportunity to press the button for click here to pledge, or here, that's just appeared on your screen, click here to support Rays of Sunshine and SEDEC. All donations are greatly received by both charities. Nick, we can. So Nick, we've got a couple of questions that come in from the audience. Nick, how has COVID changed your thinking, if at all, on future business plans? Will anything be different going forward?
Last year we looked at buying Capco. That was in the public arena. And had I bought Covent Garden back then, it might have been a different value. Well, it certainly would be a different value today, as it has, is on the stock market. So I think there will be, personally, I think there'll be huge overseas demand for high-end real estate in central London. As I said earlier, there's three financial centres of the world, in my opinion: London, New York, and Hong Kong. New York and Hong Kong, for various reasons, have got their own issues on. London's got its own issues with Brexit and various other things. But I'm very confident in the London high-end market. And actually, I'm confident in the London residential market. What worries me about London is I think we're having our 1990s moment in terms of crime like New York. And I think we're in such a bad way in crime that we have to find a way through it. Remember, most people, 99.999% of people are great people. They don't want to have this level of crime. And we have to sort it.
How would you sort it? More police on the streets?
Law and order needs to be addressed. We need to address youth zones, and I think this present mayor is out of control on it. It's uncontrollable. We saw last night in Brixton what was happening. It's headline news this morning. I think we need a change of mayor, and the sooner we have that, the better.
Interesting.
There's a question. Thank you, Nick. There's a question from Jonathan van der Merden to you, Stephen. He's concerned about the first-time buyers market with so many people furloughed and likely to lose their jobs. How do you foresee the first-time buyer market, which I saw a stat the other day? It said the average age of a first-time buyer is up to 33?
33, correct. Yeah, I saw the same stat. So, Stephen, does that concern you?
The whole market situation is concerning, in as much that probably 50% of our economy comes from hospitality, travel, airlines and restaurants. And until we resolve the economic problem, we haven't only got a problem with first-time buyers, we've got probably a problem with the whole housing market. If you take whatever the percentage of people employed in those industries out of the market, it must have a downward effect. And what Nick's saying is probably right. He might be immune, because if somebody's got 100 million quid to spend on a house, he's probably not suffering too much. But all other purchasers and everybody I talk to in normal businesses, even in good businesses, is feeling the pinch and worrying about the future. So I think it's right the way through the spectrum. Interesting.
Can I, Mark, just ask Nick? Nick, you obviously had some secret skills, because the story was that from 1995 you started the business with £6,000, and we all know where you are today. So that's an incredible success over that period of time. What advice would you give to those who are listening and watching today, wanting to emulate your success in the high-end residential area?
Well, we had a vision that we wanted to deliver great apartments better than anyone had done before. and we got lucky, on timing. So you can never predict timing because things like pandemics come around, financial crises come around. But if you invested in Amazon, which was a bookseller online 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was, you wouldn't have been doing too badly today either. So first of all, try to have a vision for the future in whatever real estate you try to do, whether that's, in technology and real estate, whether that's residential, commercial, shopping centers. Have a vision and be passionate about your conviction on it.
Yeah. Can I just ask, Peter McLean's raised a really interesting question I want to throw at Stephen.
We've got 30 seconds.
We have. It'd be a quick answer because Stephen always gives quick answers. Stephen, do you think the trend for co-living schemes with shared living space will continue post-COVID, especially given the obviously need for social distancing at the moment?
We almost need a one-word answer.
Well, we can squeeze an extra 30 seconds for you, Stephen, on co-living.
I think the rental levels are overpriced. I think the sort of value they're giving will be seen for what it is eventually, and people will move back to larger apartments at lower rents and live more comfortably. But that might be the talk of an old dinosaur and not somebody that understands the new market.
And just a quick follow-up to that, I must just ask Stephen. Stephen, do you think there is going to be a move out of the city centres because of people have gone through COVID-19? One of the questions we've had is referring to people moving outside of town centres now.
There appears to be. We have a development in Bath where we hadn't sold anything for almost 15 months. And since the lockdown, we've done about 12 units out of 30. High-end luxury, they're about £700 a foot, not 7,000. But it has started moving, and I don't think it's coincidentally.
And Nick, will you start to look to develop outside city centres?
I think, yes, I think there's going to be some opportunity. People will move out. And you're seeing that in schooling as well. People are taking their kids out of school and moving out to the country and finding different schools. So, yes, I think there will be opportunities.
Okay. So, unfortunately, our 20 minutes disappeared too quickly. It was so enjoyable talking to both yourself, Nick.
We're very, very grateful for
and to you, Stephen, both of you. Thank you ever so much. And thank you for supporting the two charities. And again, we're heading towards the halfway mark of our £30,000. So if I can ask people to pledge or donate, it would be a great opportunity to do that now. And again, Nick, thank you so much for your time and your support. Really appreciate it. We'll catch up soon. And thank you, Stephen, for your time and efforts today. Again, much appreciated. So that's 3 panels down, Mark. Wow.
One to go.
But we've got to raise over £30,000 more to get to our target of £60,000. So I think Nick Leslau has just given us a very generous donation. So Nick, you are just about to appear on our 4th panel. So I can't wait to start having a conversation with yourself. So Nick, first of all, thank you very much for your kind and generous donation that you just made. That's really appreciated.
Absolute
by
pleasure.
both of us. So Nick, we are going to be obviously having the final session, which I know Mark and I have both been looking forward to immensely, with both yourself and with Alex Midgen. Obviously, Nick, I don't think you need any introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. You are famous throughout the property industry, well known for the REIT, for your holdings within Pressbury. Obviously, you've been in the press recently with the dealings with one of your occupiers, which I'm sure we will turn to in part of our discussions. And we're going to be joined by Alex Midgen, Mark.
A fellow Old Mill Hillian.
Yes, I hear there's unfortunately Nick, Mark, and Alex share that. So I feel a bit in the minority today, but I'll have to live with it and cope. But if Alex is listening, there's the live audio and video feed that we need you to switch on, and then you can join us. So we'll wait for you to do that. But in the meantime, I think we can press on, Mark, with some questions for Nick, because we've got a number, haven't we?
Yeah, we certainly have. One of the questions that I'd like to put to you, post-pandemic world, there are going to be winners and losers in real estate, and where will the wins come and where are the losses most likely to be felt? It's a bit of a broad brush question, I know, but there must be areas that...
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, sit next to Alex Midgen on a panel,
Alex,
great
welcome.
honor. And
Well, you'll be
And
delighted
also-
to know that according to my screen, Alex is actually beneath you, Nick. So I don't know.
Isn't it?
I don't know whether because he's joined late, he actually sits beneath you. But I think your positioning was perfect by getting in early.
Well, anyhow, it's great to be here and to for Tzedek and for Rays of Sunshine, which are amazing charities, and I do hope people will support them today. But moving on to your question, I suppose winners and losers. First of all, how do you come out of any crisis? This is now my fourth crisis. I'm so old now. This is the fourth crisis that I've lived through.
Not as old as Mark though, Nick. So you're still very young. You're young
he
at
was
heart.
a year
You're young
below
at
me
heart.
at school.
2, my friend, 2.
Was it 2?
Yes.
Anyhow, all right. So you're younger than me, right? Okay, now what? But anyhow, so the
I'm even.
But you're more
younger.
knowledgeable, Nick. You're more. You and Alex are more knowledgeable than Mark.
All right,
I've got a better hit.
Which is why I want to shut him up so I can listen to you.
want
because
to
you're much
hear
more
my
interesting.
answer?
Of
Yes.
course, we want to hear your
Brief.
answer. Mark,
Okay.
behave yourself. Behave yourself.
I think one way of answering that is how do you come out of crises? In the past, can we learn anything from what happened in previous crises to guide us to what we should be doing and where we should be doing it in this one? And of course, everyone is different. If you'd listened to me in each one of the previous 3 crises, you'd have probably gone completely wrong. But I think there's one thing that I use as a guiding light, that I've always used as a guiding light in real estate, and that is something that tracks commercial property price inflation almost religiously, which is GDP. If you want to track the performance of real estate pricing, just look at any graph for the last 50 years of GDP. Sometimes it preempts it, sometimes it's a little behind it, and it stands to reason. It's logic. The better the economy does, the more space we use. And if you take out paradigm shifts, much abused words, but retail clearly has been prematurely euthanized by COVID. If you take that out the equation, if you can answer what's going to happen to GDP, I can answer what's going to happen with real estate. For what it's worth, I think coming out of this crisis, which is unusual because it wasn't born of all the other crises I've been involved with, or lived through, which has been credit led. I think you're going to see well-covenanted, long income that has performed really well through the crisis, pre the crisis, will actually compress. The yields will compress, and I think the rest, and there's a big tail. There's a big tail. The rest will probably soften, and I think it would be a very courageous person who said, I can spot the opportunity. It's there. It's here. It's now. And quite frankly, I see loads of debt funds money being raised right now, and I'm not quite sure what they're going to be buying. Perhaps development, because development tends to be the thing that goes first in recessions. But that's kind of my rather inverse.
Alex, can we throw the same question at you if that's okay?
Can we introduce Alex?
Yes,
Alex.
of course we can. Of course we can.
So Alex Midgen is from Rothschild and Companies. He's co-head of the property arm of Rothschild and Company, and can I say possibly the youngest ever main board director, age 35?
No, you can't.
No.
Mark, can you just get your facts right? I mean, how many times do I have to tell you off? Sorry, Alex. So, Alex, you are a partner at Rothschilds and Co. So he got that element of it right. So, thank you so much for joining us today and for answering some questions with Nick and Mark and myself. So, the question that was posed to Nick earlier was, how in this post-pandemic world, looking at real estate, who would be the winners and losers? Do you have any ideas for us?
I think I'd start by saying I think this is very early in the whole narrative of trying to build long-term conclusions. We're 4 months of something that is already potentially on the decline if you look at the numbers. So I think drawing long-term conclusions after 4 months or 3.5 months is quite dangerous. But I do think generally there is going to be a strong desire to take something positive from this. I think the government is going to want to take something positive from this, and I think people are going to want to take something positive from this. And I think people are far more reflective about this particular crisis as perhaps the other previous financial crises, because this is affecting people in a completely different way from the way we've seen before. And I think
the biggest change, isn't it, Alex, is that this has affected everybody.
Well, I think
every
it's
single
affecting-
household has been affected.
I think it's affecting people, and I think it's affecting people in a way that people will want to think more about how they live and how they work, and the implications for people starting to think about how they live and how they work is different from previous financial crises that have affected the real estate market. And therefore, you've got to flow from that. You know, what are the changes in employers' mindset and employees' mindsets in all of that? And when you look at the winners and the losers, I'll shut up. But I mean, the stock market is.
It's for you, or is it for him? It could be for you.
For me.
It's for you. You see, you're never off duty at Rothschilds. You know, the phone goes at all times. So whilst you're answering the phone, on a more serious note, can I just tell everybody, we are so close to the halfway point of £30,000. So please, if you're willing and you're able, donate, pledge. I'm going to ask the team to put that donate banner back up again. Please click on it. Please donate. Please help us not only reach the £30,000 level, but to go through it far on the other side so we can raise as much funds as possible during this panel session. It would be greatly appreciated by both charities. So please donate and pledge. Nick, can I ask you, because what's become clear to me in this pandemic is the risk of non-collection of rent. Really odd, isn't it? For the first time, you've got the government's telling tenants you don't have to pay your rent. You know, that's a very strange position to be in.
With no visible help for the landlords.
For the landlords, yeah. So, in your view, you know, with that being there, what effects is going to have on yields and demand?
Oh, I think you're asking a question. This is a once in a 70. It hasn't happened for 70 years, and I'm often asked, you know, how's this going to affect the future? And the answer is, unless you think it's going to happen again in the next 70 years, which it might if there's another pandemic and, you know, we have a similar set of circumstances. But it is absolutely impossible to build a business case in any industry based upon your inability to collect receivables. Okay, I don't care what business you're in. If you are restricted from collecting cash, you're in real trouble. I think what it might, however, lead to, curiously, is companies taking on less debt, having less gearing, bigger cash reserves, which ultimately will result in lower returns. And the question is, will investors live with lower returns? Because we have to, you know, I think we're just becoming more risk averse, which I'm not sure is necessarily good for the economy. But you know, you're effectively castrated. You know, we've been castrated by government in terms of collecting receivables, and any industry that has that, you know, it's a temporary thing. I think it's important to say it's a temporary thing. What does worry me is what happens at the cliff edge come September or December if this is extended. There's going to be some very angry landlords and very angry tenants, and there'll be quite a nasty standoff, I think. And I'm not sure how that's going to be resolved. I've got a feeling that certain industries, including specifically hospitality industry, there's going to have to be some sort of government intervention.
It's interesting you raise hospitality, because one of the questions that's come in is, does the panel have views on the hotel market going forward? So obviously the hotel market is obviously directly affected at the moment by COVID-19. So what's your view? What is the long-term view on the hospitality market?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm really close to that market, and I think, yes, it will change. I think the exclusively fixed lease model, for example, Travelodge, which I've been dealing with recently, is probably like retail leases being prematurely, if not terminated, adjusted. And I do think there is an argument to take the continental and the US model, which is a hybrid of fixed and variable income, to avoid the huge operational gearing that happens in the exclusively fixed lease model. And I think that applies to, you know, right across the board of hospitality, because the fixed lease model doesn't, the nature of its operational gearing means that it's great for operators when things are going well, but the minute things turn down, they're bust, because they don't keep. And that's another problem, is, you know, they're generally a lot of hospitality is owned by private equity, and they generally, you know, take out the they lever up and take out the reserves and replace it with debt, and that's a double whammy.
Can I ask, sorry, just before you ask the question, just to bring in Alex on that. Alex, obviously, bankers notoriously have always enjoyed institutional leases with guaranteed income. If you move to turnover-based rental models, how does that work from a banking perspective, if that's only applicable to the hospitality area going forward?
Well, let me go back to your first point, which is non-collection of rent a problem, and is it going to be beyond this initial period? Clearly it is a problem, and it will, in our view, play into valuation, because if there are asset classes that have a susceptibility to non-payment of rent in different environmental conditions, then a valuer is going to build in some sort of permanent void that they used to do 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Nick, you'll remember that better than me, probably. I don't know. But the reality
I take
is...
you were 2 years below mark, Alex, in the order at Mill Hill.
Yeah, or maybe.
Not really.
Maybe. So I think the non-collection of rent is going to affect, valuation. Let's start there before we get into, willingness to lend and all the rest of it. And then I think the second part of your question really was, how are bankers going to look at how this situation on a go-forward basis? I think it's going to be unchanged. They're going to look at the reliability of the underlying cash flow and the underlying credit, and whether that's turnover related or whether that's contractually related, they're going to do their same credit analysis. And if it stacks up, it will be fine.
Okay.
I think can I just add to that? I mean, we're the oddity in the global market for hotels investments. The vast majority of the world functions on the hybrid or the earnings model. In fact, there aren't many businesses that are exclusively fixed leases at all. So we're kind of being dragged screaming and kicking into the new century. So, I'm not sure I share Alex's view that because you've had this extraordinary emergency COVID legislation, that valuers are going to go, well, that's going to be reflected in valuations going forward. Because don't forget, it's not just hospitality where people aren't paying rents. It's every sector where tenants are not paying rents because they're allowed to not pay rents.
Yeah.
My comment wasn't attributed to hospitality. My comment was attributed if you have a situation where on a go-forward basis there is a view that just because there's a contracted rental number, if there is a view that it's not going to be 100% collected on every quarter date, then I think there will be valuers who will start trying to factor that in.
Because of COVID or because emergency legislation?
No.
So when have you ever, in your very few years that you've obviously been working, Alex, because you're the youngest person ever to be at Rothschild's, but when have you ever known a restriction placed on landlord in his ability to collect rent? It's never happened before in my lifetime.
Rent freeze 1974.
Sorry?
Rent freeze 1974.
Yeah, but it didn't stop you collecting rent. They stopped rents going up.
Yeah, true.
They didn't stop you collecting it. It hasn't happened since the Second World War.
True.
So were you working back in 1974? No, I was just checking. That's why Nick knows his facts.
I was at school.
Nick
I was still at school then. Stop it.
Let me move on, because we've got a myriad of questions that have come in from the audience.
One question before, and this is a great question that I've wanted to put out there to the pair of you, which was, how do you see the PLC market in the UK? Will there be more mergers and acquisitions or privatisation with share price depressed, asset values all over the place? Do we see more activity? I mean, the property stocks are down from the beginning of the year 30-40%.
Is it a time to buy?
There's been a bounce back in most other sectors. Is it a time to buy?
Alex's sweet spot here, I think.
Well, I think two things. Year to date, I think we're seeing the most polarized. This goes to the whole discussion around what is the pandemic doing to real estate. So going back to your first question, retail's down 46%, pubs are down 37%, London specialist property companies are down 31%. Self-storage is only down 10%, logistics is down 2%, residential 2%, and healthcare is flat. So if you just look at that, what you're seeing is a big diversity, a very stark diversity between those sectors that are perceived to be able to be very defensive and can withstand anything that is going on in the current environment, and those sectors which are currently in the eye of the storm or frontline facing. What's interesting is that the regional income specialists and the student specialists, both which could go either way, are sitting in the middle. They're down approximately 28% year to date. So I think the first thing is what is the stock market movements of the different sectors? And I don't think you can lump everything together and say real estate is vulnerable, real estate's going to see more merger activity. I think it's going to be very subsector specific. So I think that's the first point. The second point that I would make is if you go to the last period where there was extensive merger and acquisition activity, it was that period 2000 to 2007, following the take private of MEPC, which caused this sort of wave. And the wave of consolidation or privatization was created because you had the real estate sector as an illiquid sector trading at large discounts to balance sheet values, but you had a very healthy underlying property market, arguably with assets inflating year on year. So you saw an anomaly in the markets between the stock markets showing low liquidity and heavy discounts, but an underlying healthy real estate market, which means that people could buy at the balance sheet value and still create a lot of value for themselves as assets inflated, and they would invariably break those property companies up. And you'll remember there was that whole period where Greycoat, Raglan, Frogmore, Estates in general, they all went from the market in quite quick concessions because they all had that feature about them. I think we're in a very different place now. I don't think people are looking at the values of the shares and basically saying I could buy this cheaply and I could break this up in a rising property market and create a very high equity return. So I think we're in a slightly different environment. I think what will drive M&A activity in the current environment will be those companies that feel they have no support from their shareholders, want to raise money to delever and grow, and the stock market doesn't provide a forum for them to do that. And therefore, if their share prices continue to drift and they don't have the institutional appetite to grow, then the stock market's not the right home for them, and they will ultimately probably come off the stock market.
So can I just tell both Alex and Nick that we have now breached our halfway point. We're pushing to that £30,000 plus level. So we have only a few minutes to go. So this really is the time now for those in the audience, please, to dig deep, to hit the button when we flash up, support and donate and pledge to Rays of Sunshine and SEDEC. So team, if you can join us today in raising vital funds for these two worthy charities, it will be much appreciated. Can I just, there's lots and lots of questions that have come in from the audience, and time is running out, and we will overstay by a few minutes because that's the ability of what we can do. And it's been a fascinating conversation so far, and I certainly want to carry on for a few more minutes. I'm sure Mark does too.
Yep.
So if Nick and Alex, your diaries allow, we can overrun our slot, if that's okay. A couple of questions are coming from the audience. I guess so. Two actually, and you can decide which one of the two you want to pick. We have from Freddie Parker. Please, from
Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, so Mark knows. Please, can you ask the panelists for their view on elderly care, both retirement developments and care homes? Clearly, there are issues, but with proper funding back on the agenda, is there an opportunity out there? So I can chip in a bit about healthcare as well. So that's definitely a good question. And the other question I want to throw at you is from Daniel Berger, which says, given the government's bailouts and central bank keeping rates low, aren't investors incentivized to increase leverage?
If they're able to.
Yes, obviously if they can. But we've spoken to the banks earlier and it seems they're still in business. So Nick, which of those two would you like to answer? Or both if you wish.
Well, I mean, can I start with the care homes? Because I'm
retirement living and care homes, so there's two parts of them.
Okay, I think there's a huge market in retirement living, and I think that with an aging population, with all the demographics, there is what surprised me was that the likes of McCarthy and Stone haven't made a bigger impact than they have, and I do think that will happen. I do think the way that we provide for our old age is going to change in an asset-rich society, as a result of QE and money printing. People who own assets have done pretty well, and they want to convert into good quality retirement living. I think the higher the kind of the level, the better it's going to do. I think to care homes, where I've seen three very distinct phases in care homes. The biggest operator in the crash of the late 80s was called Take Care, and then we had Southern Cross in the global financial or before the global financial crisis, and we've seen now the problems that have been caused by the pandemic. The issue with care homes, as a general observation, because you can always take out specifics. High quality private health care homes are one thing where you could isolate those and say they're doing really well, and there isn't. Hopefully, pandemics will be relatively short-lived. But I think the problem is that the health of the sector is dependent on local authority funding, central government and local authority funding, and it has been so changeable over the years. They agree tariffs, they agree rates. The entire business model is built upon those tariffs, and then they change them.
I think, honestly, after this pandemic, the one thing that will probably come out of it is twofold. One, funding for the NHS going forward, and looking at social care and delivering proper social care to those who need it. I'm sure those two things will be the best things that come out of the pandemic.
Listen, it's always been the most important. Funding of the elderly in care homes is not a new thing. It's always been vital. It's always been critical, but it doesn't stop local authorities changing tariffs. And the problem that goes. So, a Southern Cross was a management issue ultimately, because actually when Blackstone owned it, they were doing deals at 1.8 times EBITDA cover. It was perfectly healthy. Then new management came in and were doing uncovered sale and leasebacks, and that kind of screwed the whole thing up. But my point being, the gearing nature of these things is such that they are dependent to a very large degree on quasi-government or government funding, and to the extent that tap can get switched off, and has done historically, it can collapse an industry. And I think it's utterly wrong. I think it is criminal, actually. But I do think that's one of the vulnerabilities of the business. So if you're right, and government are changing their stance on that, and will give copper-plated, guarantees on.
Well, let's hope the government's listening. Let's hope the journalists who are there can be poking the government to make sure that they are providing for the NHS and for social care. We have probably got a chance for one last question.
And it's got to be a quick one.
Alex, sorry.
Both.
Productivity and home working, what does that mean for the future? Will there be more flexibility in the workspace?
Alex,
Yeah,
the floor's yours. 30 seconds.
I think there will be. Well, the easy answer is I think there will need to be, from an employer's perspective, create more flexibility for employees, because they'll be demanding it. And it's too early to say whether social distancing measures or any other government measures will be enforced on buildings, or whether it will all be voluntarily put in place. But I think there will be obviously more need for flexible working and working from home. That doesn't mean to say that I don't think the office market will have the wheels come off. I don't. I think it will continue as it does before, and I don't think there will be too many problematic lasting measures, but I do think people will be more flexible in their approach.
And Nick, if we can give you the last few words.
I agree with Alex. I don't, I think people react a little bit hysterically to what has been 4 months of an experience, and I've been told that people are really productive at home. Yes, of course they're productive at home, because they can't go to the pub or to the park or go out. They have to stay at home and be productive. I'm interested to see how productive they are when the pubs open on the 4th of July, and we can all go out for a pint in the middle of the day, sneak one in there and hope no one notices at the office. So I'm a bit cynical about the long. I agree with Alex. I think there'll be more flexibility, but is this a fatal blow to offices as we know them? No. Not at all.
As an employer, I like to see my staff on a regular basis. I like to know what's going on, and this thought that I can't see them or know what's going on and be too far removed from ideas and creativity does not appeal to me, but that's just my opinion.
But I also think this is a great opportunity for people to have a better work-life balance. So there'd be more flexible working. A lot of companies have done it for a long time. And I think the approach that sometimes you could be working from home, but also there's sometimes you're going to be needed in an office. I also agree. I don't think this is the end of offices, but it may well be a reshaping in some form. So can we ask one more time on behalf of Nick, Alex, Mark and myself, if you haven't yet had an ability to donate or pledge funds
It's our last opportunity during this webinar.
Correct.
Please press the button.
Donate. Get us as
In these
close
hard
as
times.
possible to our target of £60,000. It would be incredible if we can reach our target. From those who are watching now, from those I know who may well be watching a recording, the feed will be there, allowing you to donate not just now while we were live on this event, but also later on when you watch the recording. All your support is greatly received. And can I also say, both to Nick and to Alex, we cannot thank you enough for joining us today. A huge thank you from Mark and myself for both listening to both of you, who know an awful lot about the industry and giving us an insight into what may well happen over the future. So, Nick, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank
And
you.
so that just leaves me to...
Well, I'd like to thank everyone behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
At producing Rays of Sunshine, SEDEC, obviously my co-panelist, Nigel, my PA and everyone else that's put this together. Thank you at such short notice, and thank you all for joining us. And maybe we'll see them all again one day soon.
Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure not only to spend 2 hours in your company, but also to have an opportunity to speak to 9 very interesting people.
Which is quite unique. To get 9 together.
Absolutely, very unique, and from a whole range of different backgrounds.
And it's good to see you, not across an Insta.
Absolutely. So normally Mark and I fight it out on an Instagram live, but today, side by side for charity, for SEDEC and Rays of Sunshine, we have brought you Property, What's the Future? Thank you all for joining us, and thank you panelists for your contributions. It's been a great event, and Mark,
stay safe.
Stay safe, keep well everyone, and see you all very soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining.